Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, how are you today? What's going on?
I am doing well, Bryce. How are you doing? You mentioned on the podcast last time that you'd been a little under the weather.
Yeah, I'm slowly starting to recover, and we're good to go. Like last week, our recording, we did have to postpone one, and then I was good with recording our other last episodes. So yeah, things are slowly starting to get back to normal, and what's really helped kind of get me back to normal has been listening to some music lately, which is actually what we're going to be talking about today. And not just some music, or not just like any kind of music.
Not just any music.
Just random music. We are talking about the 70s supergroup, Swedish supergroup, I should say, ABBA. And yeah, it's funny because when we started Overdue Finds, like if you'd told me, hey, in a few years, you're going to be doing an episode on ABBA, I don't think I would have believed you.
No, and I have a record going, which is that in all of the episodes of Overdue Finds that I have done, I have not once sang on the podcast, which I know for a fact you have, Bryce. And so I'm a little nervous that I might end up breaking that record today.
Yeah, you think we're gonna maybe hear some Waterloo or SOS or Mamma Mia?
There's just so many. Like I'll be on my guard against some, and then all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, bam, Dancing Queen is gonna come in.
Well, today, joining us to talk all about ABBA, and not just ABBA, but like obviously they've got a new album out. There's a hologram concert. There's lots going on with them. And to chat all about everything ABBA with us, she was just on the podcast a few weeks ago when we were talking about Thanksgiving. And during that episode, she let us know that she was a huge ABBA fan. So welcome back to the show, Katie Turzansky from our Strathcona branch. Katie, how are you today?
I am great. I have been a dancing queen all day today in anticipation of this moment. So I'm doing great.
How likely do you think we are to hear you sing in this episode?
I mean, the entire branch has heard me sing like most of the day already. So I'm primed and ready to go as far as singing goes. We'll see. But how could you not, right?
There's a lot for us to get into today on our episode about ABBA and everything music, hologram concerts, which is going to be an interesting conversation. But before we get into that and our Overdue Finds, I actually want to give a shout out to a couple of podcasts. First of all, I want to give a shout out to our friends Indy Randhawa and Samantha Hees and their podcast, I Love This, You Should Too, who mentioned us actually on their October 18th episode of their podcast. They were talking about some spooky movies, including Labyrinth. And of course, Indy's a coworker of ours. And yeah, he was actually on Overdue Finds a couple years ago on our Oh, the Horror episode, where we were talking about some of our favorite scary movies. So their podcast is very similar to kind of Overdue Finds. So if you're looking for another pop culture podcast to listen to, give them a follow. They're a great show.
And without giving too much away, fans of I Love This, You Should Too, stay tuned to Overdue Finds, because you might hear Indy coming up on a future episode.
Yes, he might be coming back on the show. And then also too, Caroline, we've been so lucky to be doing Overdue Finds for like the last 3 years or so. And EPL kind of has like a second podcast going right now, and that's through our Capital City Press team. So it's actually called Capital City Press Anthology. And this it's a lot different than what we normally talk about on Overdue Finds. It's not a traditional podcast, but it's more of a collection of audio stories from local writers. And what's really cool about it is it comes out every other Friday on off weeks from us. And basically there's short stories read by EPL staff members on there. So the first 5 episodes are out now, and there's some stories on there from really talented Edmonton writers. And yeah, give them a listen. It's great for if you're driving or maybe just walking around and you want to hear some great local stories. And check out Capital City Press Anthology.
It's exciting.
All right, so let's move on to our Overdue Finds picks. Katie, besides ABBA, what have you been enjoying lately?
I just finished a weird and wonderful book that was sort of the tail end of my spooky season reads that I was gonna talk about. It's called We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. And that title, We Ride Upon Sticks, is actually a quote from The Crucible by Arthur Miller. And it is about already I'm laying the foundation for it to be about Salem witches. It's about a field hockey team, actually.
Nice, like, curveball there.
Right. So the 1989 Danvers Falcons, they're a high school women's field hockey team. And Danvers is where the Salem witch trial stuff happened. Like, the town kind of split up over the years. Anyway, it's in that area. And they're not very good. So, they're from the area. They think they can learn a little bit about this stuff. All the members of this field hockey team sign their names in an Emilio Estevez notebook, circa Breakfast Club, and commit sort of to the darkness, and that they will do whatever the darkness desires so that they can be successful in field hockey, like Salem witches. And it is so strange, but it was really enjoyable. And the author actually was a member of the 1989 Danvers High School field hockey team. And so the experience, the time travel experience of this, like, it gets 1989 pop culture, like, spot on. And you just feel like you're in that high school with these girls with their, fluffed up bangs and whatever else that they have going on. And it's just really, it's a high school story, and they have complicated relationships and are trying to win state championships and are trying to pass their final year of high school, and they're trying to get ready for prom and all of this stuff. But also they've kind of signed a pact with a dark version of Emilio Estevez, and that causes all kinds of problems.
Now, on our last episode, or the last episode you were on, you talked about audiobooks. Were you enjoying this as an audiobook or a print book or ebook?
I read it as an audiobook.
And how was the narration?
It was really good. There were a few times I kind of wished, because the character, sort of the focalizing character, moves between the players of the team. And I wondered if in the print version that was more clear, like if there was some indication that I wasn't getting, because sometimes it took me a while to catch up with who I was with in that moment. But it was an enjoyable audiobook.
Quick side note: you mentioned Arthur Miller's The Crucible. Fun little fact about me: grade 10, I was in a stage production in high school of The Crucible.
Yeah, I had so many follow-up questions.
I hope this means that there is a picture of you as a pilgrim somewhere in the world.
Yeah, there is.
Excellent.
And I will, for those of you familiar with The Crucible, I played Old Man Giles Corey in that stage production of Medicine Hat High School stage production of The Crucible.
That just reminds me that we really do need to do our Medicine Hat episode.
Yeah, that's right. It's been that and the professional wrestling one. We've got so many.
2022 is going to be fantastic for the podcast. I can feel it.
So, Caroline, how about you? What have you been enjoying lately?
Interestingly, I also have kind of a dark pick from 1990. So this same type of time period, but it's a movie that came out back then. It's called Reversal of Fortune. Have either of you seen this movie?
I'm familiar with it. Jeremy Irons is in it, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's Jeremy Irons' Oscar-winning performance. It's the story of Sonny von Bulow, who was an socialite who went into a mysterious coma. Her husband, Klaus, Jeremy Irons, was accused of poisoning her with insulin and trying to kill her. The movie is the story of kind of what unfolded and then how the legal trial happened. It's based on a book written by lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who in the movie is played by Ron Silver, and his performance is fantastic. It's when I first watched it, I was really surprised that it wasn't Jeremy Irons' movie, and it is in a lot of ways. He won a lead actor Oscar for it, but the story is really centered around Alan Dershowitz taking on this case, his questions of Klaus von Bülow's guilt and innocence and the way that they're using the legal system, but also fighting against it. It's just incredible. Glenn Close plays Sonny von Bülow, and there are kind of stories that are told over time where you see a scene and then later on you find out a bit more behind what was going on. It's a really, really interesting movie of a fascinating true story, and EPL has it in our collection, including streaming through Canopy. So I was excited to see it there because it's not commonly found on a lot of streaming services. It was one that I was actually kicking myself for not talking about in our It's Not on Netflix episode that we did, but I thought, well, I'll just make it my regular Overdue Find pick then.
There you go. Yeah, we've talked about Canopy quite a bit on the show before, and huge fan of that service. And the one thing I do like about it is kind of like a TV nerd is like you can stream their movies in high definition, which I know maybe doesn't sound like a big deal, but yeah, when you're watching some movies, it's kind of nice to have that extra added resolution, if you will, to the movies. But yeah, they've got lots of great documentaries, and as we've talked about just recently, there's a lot of studios like MGM and Warner Brothers who've released a lot of their movies into on Canopy now for you to stream, so check that out.
Canopy also has a pretty good algorithm for determining what else you might like. And I know that because they've got me pretty well nailed in terms of looking at it and seeing, yes, I do want to watch all of those. So hopefully they can do the same for you. Bryce, what about you?
All right. So last couple of years, I've talked about this game a lot on the show. There's been different versions of it. My pick this week actually is the new Call of Duty game called Call of Duty Vanguard. So this game just came out a couple of weeks ago. We have it in our collection. If you want to play it, I recommend putting your name down for a hold right away. It looks like there's a lot of people with their name down for a hold, but as I've mentioned before on the show, we will get in extra copies, and your hold will come in sooner than later. But what I do like about the Call of Duty games, nothing really has changed too much besides the setting. This one's actually set in World War II, which is kind of like you go back in the series of Call of Duty, and that's kind of where the first original games took place. Last couple of years, it's been set in 1984 Cold War type era. This one, though, you get to kind of go back to World War II and experience fighting all over the world. And you get to learn about some of the different characters in the game as you're interrogated by an SS officer played by Lord of the Rings Dominic Monaghan. So that's one of the cool things about sometimes playing these games is that you do get to see these big actors. For example, a few years ago in Call of Duty, I believe it was Josh Duhamel was also in like another World War II version of the game. So this is a really fun game. The one area I really like is multiplayer. You can jump online, play against your friends in different modes. There's a zombies mode as well. And yeah, the one thing I've talked about before too in the past with Call of Duty that I kind of got back into it during the height of the pandemic because it was a great way for me and my friends to kind of stay connected and play online against each other and, you know, talk on a regular basis. So yeah, it's something we've continued to do even as we still plow through the pandemic here. But yeah, if you're looking for another first player shoot 'em up game to play, Call of Duty Vanguard's a good one. And I also have to mention too, one of the writers in the game is by the name of Shelby Carlton, who's actually from here in Edmonton. And a quick teaser, we're going to be chatting with her on a future episode of the podcast.
I'm really looking forward to that. We've talked in the past about like non-traditional writing, and I will be doing a little bit of Call of Duty research leading up to that interview, but I'm excited to hear about kind of what the experience is like creating a story for a video game.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you have this big franchise, and yeah, I've got so many questions about like, what's it like work? Do you have to work within canon for certain characters and all of that fun stuff? So, yeah, watch Overdue Finds, and we're going to be chatting with her on an upcoming episode here. All right. We're talking all about ABBA.
Like, I can't take this. How can you talk about ABBA and not just start grinning? Like, it's the most feel good topic. It's awesome.
With some of these episodes, I thought it'd be kind of interesting just to quickly share some facts and interesting tidbits about ABBA here before we get started. ABBA, they were formed in Stockholm, Sweden in 1972, and the group's name is an acronym for the first letters of their first names arranged in a palindrome. They're also one of the best-selling music artists of all time, with record sales estimated to be between 150 and 385 million albums sold worldwide. And I thought this was really interesting too. In 1979, they kicked off their very first North American tour here in Edmonton. The date was September 13th, 1979. And I read a CBC news article on it. And apparently they chose Edmonton. And I thought this was funny. They chose Edmonton because of the forgiving audiences. They wanted to work out the kinks before they hit the larger North American audiences. So maybe it was like, yeah, Edmonton will be forgiving. Let's test them out before we go to like Madison Square Garden or something.
They're not the only ones either. I think that for a while anyway, we were a place that some promoting company had figured out was a good place to start, because there are a few bands.
It's funny because I saw another article too that talked about in 85, it wasn't Edmonton, but Tina Turner kicked off her like North American tour that year in St. John's, Newfoundland. And it was kind of like the same thing. It was like, these are nice people, and we'll play 5 shows here. We'll get all the rust out, and we'll play in front of these nice people before we move on to really the rest of Canada and the United States. But one of the other cool things too about that Edmonton concert, there was an 18-year-old Wayne Gretzky in attendance before he had ever played in his first National Hockey League game. And he thought it was really cool because he saw the singer Annie Frid Lingstad wearing his jersey while she performed. And of course, they were introduced into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2010. So before we start talking about some of the more recent things, Katie, I have to ask you, what is your history with ABBA?
So I was thinking about this, and I even talked to some staff here at Strathcona, because I was asking, like, does anyone remember being introduced to ABBA? And because I don't. And it's like I was not introduced to breathing. It just was there my whole life. And the staff here mostly felt the same way, that it's just, they were so big when they were big. I mean, they're still so big. They're just kind of ubiquitous. And so if there was ever music in your house growing up, it would have included a little bit of ABBA, because if the radio was on, often through the 70s and 80s, and still, that would include a little bit of ABBA. And so they are about the age of my parents. And so my parents would have been like right in there, ready when, they won Eurovision. They would have, heard the song when it was fresh and new, and it was such a big hit around the world. And so it just was part of like the culture in our house and the pop culture I always grew up with.
Caroline, how about you? Was ABBA playing in the background in your house growing up?
I don't think it was.
Never?
I'm not going to say never, but it was definitely on the radio. It was definitely cultural. But when I think of where I kind of started with ABBA was the late mid to late 90s disco revival of like looking back at the 70s and that being a cultural reference. And so that was where like Dancing Queen was a hit. You know, you had, you know, stuff like That 70s Show, or Stars on 54 coming through with the, you know, the remix disco style. And then the band 18s. Do you remember that? It was like early 2000s. It was like an ABBA tribute band featuring like Swedish teenagers.
Was it kind of like the mini pops?
Did you dream this?
No, I not only did not dream this, I double checked to make sure, and Hoopla did not let me down. We have several 18 streaming CDs in Hoopla that will be linked in the item list, because they were just these teens who would sing ABBA songs, but they were called A-teens, so to give them a little bit of artistic freedom in branching out to other things along the way. And that was really it. I hadn't seen it at the time, but I think I knew of ABBA as like something being revisited culturally through something like the movie Muriel's Wedding, an Australian movie that came out in 1994. I was not watching it in 1994, but it had like this ABBA infused soundtrack, and that was always something that was pointed to along the lines of ABBA. And then, as you mentioned, Katie, once we hit the Mamma Mia era. But for me, and this, I mean, it's no secret, I watched a lot of television. What was more resonant with me was not Mamma Mia the show, because I did not see the stage show. I did not live anywhere where it was performing or touring until, you know, I moved to Edmonton. But it was just everywhere. Like, there were banners for it. There was a commercial that ran all the time for Mamma Mia at the Royal Alexandra Theatre in Toronto, and I was watching this commercial on YouTube, and I could still, like, those scenes are frozen in my head. It's what I associate with the music. And by the time it was just kind of at that level, like you say, Katie, it was air. It was out there. It was just what it was. And then the other reference I have for it is the episode of Community, the TV show Community from the second season, called Epidemiology, which is their zombie episode. The soundtrack to their Halloween party is just ABBA songs as they are fighting off this zombie invasion that makes sense in the you'll have to watch to figure out how this all makes sense in a community college, but it does, and it's ABBA music. And so as I'm hearing, that's actually a main reference to me as I'm listening to a lot of ABBA. What about you, Bryce? Was this the air you were breathing as well?
Not really. It's weird because I do remember my parents had a cassette copy of their 1979 album, Voulez-Vous. But like, I remember discovering that, like going through boxes of stuff and seeing that cassette as like a teenager and thinking it was the most hilarious thing in the entire world that my parents had this cassette. Because you have to keep in mind too, like, I was born in 79, and by the time really I start kind of remembering what music I'm listening to, we're talking about like early, like 83, 84, 85 in there. And by that time, disco's gone. Like, disco is dead, and you know, it's all kind of about adult contemporary rock and like Van Halen and all of that stuff. So I never, like, I'm sure I heard it on the radio the odd time, but disco kind of growing up was always kind of a bit of a joke, until really, Caroline, you mentioned that like around 94 when Muriel's Wedding came out, and there really did seem to kind of be this resurgence of disco and kind of the 70s in general, because I also remember around that time too, Grease, so like the 78 movie with John Travolta, that also kind of had a resurgence around that time as well. And so a lot of stuff in the 70s was starting to kind of be cool again. And also around that time too, we also kind of have the release of ABBA Gold, which I think like everybody, if you have a CD, if you have any CDs in your collection, I think most people own a copy of ABBA Gold.
Yep.
It's like one of the best selling greatest hits albums of all time. But like, yeah, like I said, growing up, disco was always like, disco sucks. And yeah, I remember finding this cassette copy of Voulez-Vous playing like the first couple songs and thinking it was just horrible. It was like the worst things I've ever heard in my life. But as I've gotten older, I've definitely appreciated the music a lot more, though.
Would you say that you've said thank you for the music?
Yes.
Thank you for going with me on that. One of the things that has been my recent ABBA kind of background is an episode of the Slate podcast Hit Parade, which came out in November 2018, and it drew a line. It's the podcast series looks at number one songs. And interestingly, ABBA only had one number one single on the Hot 100 in the States, and that was Dancing Queen. But this podcast drew a line from ABBA in the 70s to Roxette in the 80s to Ace of Base in the 90s to Max Martin, who was a producer who worked really influenced Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, late 90s pop. So going from ABBA to Britney Spears, basically. And one of the things they talk about in that podcast is writing these lyrics in English and just the interesting phrasing that can sometimes come through, and it's said in a way that you hadn't really heard before.
One of the things I noted down, like as I was prepping for today, was how interesting I find that these people were writing lyrics in a language that was not their first language, but there's some next level like metaphor or turns of phrase. It's not that it's like super, super complex, but in languages that I speak that aren't my first language, I would not be able to create that kind of lyric. And I'm always so surprised and impressed by that. But you're right. There's something that's like not being a native speaker somehow made it more interesting because it is just not quite how you would say it, but it's compelling.
Mm-hmm. So thinking of some of the classic ABBA, we're gonna talk about their latest release, which just came out a couple weeks ago by the time this comes out. But thinking of classic ABBA, what are some of your favorite songs? Katie?
Classic ABBA? Well, my favorite is Knowing Me, Knowing You, followed closely by Fernando.
I mean, they're all very good choices, right? Like this is as much as like I want to know what your favorites are. Like, what do you say? Because it's like, oh yeah, that's a good one. But then, like, you know, Bryce, if you do have a favorite ABBA song, which you may not, but I'll probably be like, oh yeah, that's a good one.
Well, and even Knowing Me, Knowing You is like a devastating breakup song put to like an upbeat disco beat, and you just can't help but belt along with it. Like it, yeah.
My favorite ABBA song similar to that is SOS. And it's also too, like I was listening to it yesterday, and you're right, it's like this upbeat disco song, but when you're like listening to the words, it's just like kind of depressing because it's just kind of like, oh, there's this other person. And it's interesting because I was kind of reading some stuff online about them. And apparently what was tough about the group was that several of them had gone through breakups and everything.
With each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. With each other. And so kind of obviously that there is kind of some of those darker themes in some of their music, but yeah, SOS is my jam. How about you, Caroline?
I love Take a Chance on Me.
Take a chance, take a chance, take a chance.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, it just hits right away. I also love, like, the power pop of Gimme, Gimme, Gimme a Man After Midnight. I don't think it's a shocker that one has been sampled as much as it has, because it's just powerful in it. Like some of them are light, but thinking of the mixture of the music and the lyrics, this is probably the first time I have professionally looked into ABBA, where I would be listening to it and then looking at the lyrics at the same time, and I'm looking and going, whoa, this is darker than it's sounding in my ear. And yeah, reading through what they went through and like the progression of their personal relationships and everything that was happening as they were trying to live up to what they had put out there as the image of the band. Yeah, it's just a very interesting progression of that decade of ABBA. So we've talked a little bit about our histories with it. Earlier this month, ABBA released Voyage, which is their first album of new material in 40 years. Have you had a chance to listen to any of the songs? And if so, what did you think? Katie?
Have I had a chance? Of course, I've listened to the whole album. My goodness. The day that before they released the album and they released the singles, and it was like new music from ABBA Day. And I remember because I was listening to the CBC News or something in the morning, and it was news. It was like on World Report, this is big international news. And they sampled one of the songs, and I was like, okay. And then it was Don't Shut Me Down. I remember this. And like, okay, so it starts, and then all of a sudden that like disco beat drops. And I was like, this is an ABBA song. And I was all of a sudden right there for the new ABBA music. But yeah, I have listened to the whole thing. I think it sounds like grown-ups. It has it's less playful maybe than ABBA of the 70s. And the way I described it is it sounds like you're eavesdropping on conversations between exes talking about what happened in their relationship. Like, because there's so many songs that reference what happened to ABBA and the time since. And so themes about like, I'm not who I was then, or I can't believe we're here now, or I still believe in you, or like there's a song that's basically about split custody of a child. It's all about their relationships and their story. And so it feels a little like you're listening in on something that should be kind of private, but all over this, all the ABBA sound that we're used to. There's even one that sounds kind of like an Irish folk song.
Yeah.
That is about kind of breaking away and going out on your own and leaving someone behind. And it's like, wow, like even that, which is like layers, like Irish folk music is not ABBA, but it all kind of works. And some of them are more, disco beat than others, but it felt to me like it was a little eavesdroppy.
Yeah, I had a chance to listen to it the other day. And by the way, if you do want to listen to it, you can actually download it immediately off of Hoopla, which is super handy. So make sure you do that if you want to listen to their new music. I was kind of torn on the album. I think it's really cool that they came back after 40 years. And like the one thing that I did note about it was, and this is what you want from a band like ABBA. Like I wanted it to sound like ABBA, and it did sound like ABBA. Like I don't know if I was expecting something completely different, but I'm glad we didn't get that. But at the same time, and maybe it's just because for some of the other songs like Mamma Mia, Dancing Queen, Waterloo, whatever, we've heard those songs like a million times and we know all the beats. This time you're listening to it and I was just like, like it seemed kind of slower pace than
more of the ballad version ABBA songs and less of the Dancing Queen version ones. Mm-hmm. And I was looking for like the ones that are my favorite ones from the new album are definitely, they have that like disco beat to them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, for example, I like Don't Shut Me Down, mm-hmm. and No Doubt About It are probably my two favorite songs off the album. They do sound more of like if you told me that was like a lost track off of their Voulez-Vous album in 1979, I would believe you. So, but I think it's like I said, it's always kind of like that where there's probably a lot of pressure on them too. Like, I mean, everybody since the mid 90s has been wanting new music from these guys, and to wait 40 years and to have this come out. And I think it's almost kind of brave of them in a way. I'm sure they were definitely compensated quite handsomely for their efforts, but I think that takes a lot to kind of come out after 4 decades and release new music. And especially when you have a catalog like theirs that's so beloved by like pretty much everybody. Caroline, what did you think of the album?
My sense of it was that it fit. It fit in with ABBA's sound, but in a way that was new. And I don't know that newness really speaks to today. There were many times when I was listening to the album where I just wrote down 80s vibe, because of it wasn't the same like 70s disco dancing, but it was more of like that synth ballady stuff that you hear, which kind of makes sense. If you think of where they left off, it feels like this is the logical next album from them. It was just 40 years after they thought the audience thought that we might be getting it. I also loved Don't Shut Me Down, and I knew, like, thinking back to that comment about the songwriting, the first lines are, "A while ago I heard the sound of children's laughter. Now it's quiet, so I guess they left the park." I was listening to this and I'm like, where is this going? And it's like not the kind of typical lyric thing that you would have, but then, as you say, that disco beat kicks in and you're off and running. And I was just like, okay, I'm on board with this. There was a Christmas song on the album.
The Little Things.
Little Things, and I can see that what after I had my reaction of, is this a Christmas song? Because it's just there in the middle of it. I could see that getting into a rotation, of just sliding in of like easy listening Christmas music. And I think that was my main takeaway from Voyage, was that it might not have been hitting the highs of ABBA at its like classic, at its best, but it fits with ABBA in their career span.
Well, and the Christmas one you're talking about is another example where the lyrics are like, this is like when we were together at Christmas time, and this is what it was like. And so it's again throwing back to like what their relationship has done. And then it got me thinking about when we were all together once talking about time loops and how Christmas we tend to create our own and we want to recreate our Christmas traditions. And I thought that song actually kind of fit into what we were talking about there and trying to like recapture those moments
on an album that can't avoid talking about recapturing the past
and nostalgia. Yeah.
So speaking of nostalgia, in May of 2022, they're going to start a series of concerts in London where the group is actually going to appear as virtual avatars, or avatars, so ABBA-tars, depicting them as they appeared in 1979. What do you think about this plan? Like, Katie, if that stage show was to roll through here in Edmonton at Rogers Place, are you paying $125 to go see avatars?
So I haven't been able to find the answer to this. So if either of you did in your research, I would be interested to know, because I'm not clear. Are they singing live or not? I know that the movement is like recorded, but and there's a live band, but are they somewhere in a room with a mic, or is it pre-recorded? I think it's pre-recorded. I
took away, and I don't know this for sure because I tried to find this out before we started recording today. I think they're like recorded.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
I don't think they're in Sweden at their homes,
like in a studio somewhere singing.
No.
So I don't know. I think I might. I have seen, as part of a concert that was not billed as a hologram concert, I did see Sonny Bono out there singing I've Got You, Babe, when I went to a Cher concert as a hologram. So I've had this experience. And I mean, it was touching. It was lovely. But I don't know. I go to in a previous pre-COVID and actually pre-child existence, I went to a lot of concerts. And I particularly went to a lot of concerts of performers from like the 60s and 70s. It's kind of where my musical taste often lands. And so I've seen a lot of shows where I've been like, I kind of wish I hadn't, because I want to remember this more like how it sounds on the album and less like what I just heard. But also sometimes there's just nothing that beats someone doing it live. And I've seen Fleetwood Mac both ways. One time I saw them and it was like that they should just stay where they are hiding. And one time I saw them and it blew me away. And so I don't know, I might, though. I would definitely consider it because I still think it would be an experience. And just like when you go to like Queen now and it isn't Freddie Mercury, it's not the same, but you still have a really like evocative experience from having that live music moment. So I might.
It's interesting, the balance of wanting what you know and already and the new, because that is kind of what this is. Like the Avatar, it's not what they look like now on stage. It's as they appeared in 1979.
At Northlands.
Right? And I honestly think that September 13th, 1979 is my new if I could travel back in time day. I think I would be one of the 15,000 people at Northlands, standing next to Wayne Gretzky watching this happen. So you kind of get the visual experience of peak ABBA was, but there is a newness in at least it's a recent recording, if not a live recording.
Yeah, the one thing I read about it was I believe George Lucas's Industrial Light Magic is kind of like producing it.
I'm sure it's going to be amazingly done, right? Like it has to be.
100%. Yeah, like I think it's interesting. It's definitely a neat concept. Like I don't know how much. Like I think I would definitely be tempted to go. It would totally depend on ticket prices. Like I don't think I'd want to pay over $100 to go watch holograms perform, but it kind of did make me think about like, is this kind of going to be something that's just going to be like the new norm in the future? And it's just something that I guess we're going to have to kind of get used to. I mean, I think this kind of all kicked off with, I think it was Coachella a few years ago when we had virtual Tupac come out and perform a couple of songs. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would rather obviously see them in person. Like they don't have to be running around the stage at their age and just singing their songs. I think would be fine. And obviously maybe it's just them. They're like, you know what? We just don't have the energy to go on tour and do this.
We had Caroline and I did see an ABBA cover group once at a strange Grand Prairie Canada Day barbecue event. That it's a long story, but anyway, they were bad. They were good, and there's just something about like being with people, hearing music that you all know together that is a really wonderful experience. And that kind of moment where everyone's like wants to be the dancing queen and wants to be moving and wants to be, and I think you would get that at this hologram experience. But yeah, it's not the whole thing.
I hadn't realized that ABBA really wasn't a touring group. I mean, when you look at if they were formed in 1972 and their last TV appearance was in 1982, so we're looking at a decade there. Their first North American tour was in 1979, and they had done some other things throughout Europe. Like they did tour, but it wasn't. And I was reading one thing that said they did so many videos, like officially produced videos, to kind of make up for the fact that they weren't touring and traveling for all these reasons. That made me think that they might have been really well suited to the current iteration of a Las Vegas residency, like when Celine packs into Vegas and just sets up.
The residency has been the term that's being used for these London shows. That it's like they're setting up a residency in London, even though they're not in the building.
They're not in residence.
They're going to be at the first show. I was reading an article that said they're going to be at the first show. I don't know if they're performing, but they're going to be present. Yeah.
They're like, let's go see this.
Yeah.
Let's see how we do here.
I think it fits, and I think it's one of the maybe a few groups that I could see that this kind of makes sense to me that they would do this, because there was this theatricality to them. And I was reading, it might have been on the Wikipedia page, but that because of Swedish tax law, their clothing was only tax deductible if it could not be worn for anything but performing, which is why their looks were so frequently over the top, because that was what Swedish tax law demanded of them.
Who knew today's episode would dive into Swedish tax law?
So before we wrap up, I did want to talk a little bit about Eurovision. ABBA won in 1974, or rather Sweden won the Eurovision Song Contest with ABBA singing Waterloo, which has been named the best song in the competition's history on multiple occasions. What do you think makes Waterloo such a classic Eurovision song?
It was the first one in English to win. It was the first one that was in a language that was not the primary language of the country of the competitors, right? So there was a couple of years in the 70s where they didn't have to compete in their home language. Then they had to again until the late 90s. So there was this little window, and they got into Eurovision. I'm sorry, did you not want all of these stats? They got into Eurovision.
Dude, this is why we invited you.
They won the competition in Sweden that made them their, like, the Swedish nominee for Eurovision in Swedish, with Waterloo in Swedish. And then they changed it for Eurovision into English, which I think is just interesting. I mean, part of it was that it was so new for Eurovision, like that kind of, it wasn't a ballad, it was an upbeat, dancey thing. They even had choreography, sort of. I mean, they did, but it was limited, but still they had it. Like, that was not really what Eurovision was to that time. Whereas now, like, you watch the Will Ferrell movie and it's like, that is what and it's so showy now, but wasn't what it was like. And so, I mean, I think that's part of what made it huge. It was fresh as part of Eurovision. And then, I mean, I don't know. It just is the, like, granddaddy of pop music. Like, I just think it's so great. It's lyrically great. You can't help but just start moving to it when you hear it. Like, I can't specifically put a finger on it, but I just think it's fantastic. It's also a song that, like, it's about Napoleon. Like, how bizarre is that, right? And that metaphor of, like, I'm going to give into this relationship the way that that Napoleon surrendered at Waterloo. Like, that's sophisticated for pop music. And I think the better question is, do you think Napoleon thinks Waterloo was worth it? Because this is ultimately where we ended up with this amazing song. And as a fellow short person with a bad attitude, I would say yes, but I don't know.
Eurovision Song Contest as an entity is something quite interesting and deep and cultural in a way that I fully admit I don't understand, and I'm definitely not the barometer that everything is measured against, but as someone who has a fair understanding of pop culture, looking at the list of winning Eurovision songs, there aren't a lot that I could, like, hum in a way that someone else could understand what it was. There weren't a lot that really cracked through, at least to a North American / US cultural impact in the way that Waterloo did.
Yeah, it definitely had scope beyond what they typically have. I was in Germany once during Eurovision visiting family, and it was always like, so it was on every house we were in. If we were staying with this aunt or this cousin or whatever, like, it was on because everyone watches. And that year, Germany was being represented by a group of like country singers that, like, dressed as cowboys, and I was like, excuse me, Germany? Okay, well, you guys do you. Yeah, you're right. Like, I don't think, even though, and countries outside of Europe have competed in Eurovision, you have to be there to understand it. And I feel glad that I just happened to even see it on TV in Europe at one time. But I am definitely an outsider to all that is Eurovision.
So if anyone is listening who has some insights into the Eurovision experience as a cultural insider, email us. podcast@epl.ca. We want to talk about Eurovision. Katie, you mentioned the Will Ferrell movie. The soundtrack to that is available. The movie itself is on Netflix, so it's not something that is available for our catalog, but the soundtrack, which is worth checking out even if you haven't seen the movie, because it is a really high level mimicking of songs that you would hear on Eurovision. I mean, Husavik, my hometown, was Oscar nominated.
The soundtrack is amazing. The film is really fun. Will Ferrell's wife is Swedish, and he has gone deep into a passion for Eurovision because he married into that. So, and Waterloo and ABBA really kick off that character's passion for both music and for the Eurovision Song Contest in that movie. And so it's definitely, there's no arguing that it's been an influential song and moment, and it is in that film as well.
When I think of Waterloo, Caroline, I was probably going to bring this up. Like, it's not an episode of Overdue Finds without a random Simpsons tie-in, but season 7 of The Simpsons, the episode called Mother Simpson, where we finally get to meet Homer's long-lost mother. We find out that she, during the 60s, was a wanted criminal after taking down Mr. Burns' biolab. They track her down. Of course, she's staying at The Simpsons, and Mr. Burns is in like a tank with the police, and he's so excited to be taking in Mona Simpson that he decides to put on his tape of Flight of the Valkyries and is going to play it as they take her down, only to find out that Smithers has taped over that song with Waterloo. So as they're knocking down the door at the Simpsons house, Waterloo by ABBA is playing. So that's the first thing I always think of when it comes to that song.
Yeah, and it's such a fun, just mood setting song. Before we get to our roundtable questions, Bryce, can you let everyone know what we'll be chatting about on our next episode, which will be available on Friday, December 3rd?
So this year marks the 20th anniversary of the first Lord of the Rings film, The Fellowship of the Ring. On our next episode, we're going to be chatting all about Lord of the Rings with superfan and friend of the podcast, Kate Gibson, about the film, how it stacks up as an adaptation, and of course, the upcoming Amazon series too. So, Caroline, you just sent me some notes earlier today about that episode. I hope I'm not spoiling stuff here, but you mentioned to me that you've only ever watched the first Lord of the Rings movie?
I have seen the first one once, and
20 years ago.
Yeah, it was in the theater 20 years ago. So I have some research to do before I sit down. I have definitely asked Kate some questions when we were talking about setting up the episode, and I can feel her replying with just like a face palm at her desk. So I might have some questions for her, but I'm really looking forward to talking about the movie, the experience, what it was like for her as a fan going into the movie, because I think that's an important take on it.
And as a library podcast, it seems odd we've not covered Lord of the Rings yet. So this is long overdue, probably.
I like that you're covering ABBA before you're covering Lord of the Rings. But also what I was going to say is I think that like an ABBA soundtrack might really improve the like bajillion hours you're about to spend watching those movies, Caroline. So maybe maybe there needs to be a bit of a marrying of like these episodes, and maybe we need to overlay some mood setting ABBA music over your Lord of the Rings experience.
I need to get the ABBA cut of Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Yeah. As they're leaving the Shire, Voulez-Vous is playing in the background. I think would definitely improve it.
Real potential here. Yeah.
Moving into our roundtable questions. First one, Katie, which ABBA song would you pick to sing at karaoke?
I said it already, Knowing Me, Knowing You, which was my song for whichever, whether it was Rock Band or Guitar Hero, whichever one of those it was on, I sang it every time that came out.
Bryce?
I'd probably have to go with my favorite ABBA song I mentioned earlier, SOS. If I'm picking a karaoke song, I want something that people are going to enjoy. And the one thing I do like about that song too, it's got a decent amount of instrumental parts in it too. So if I got to take a breather or take a drink during this performance, SOS is a great one to go with. Caroline, how about you?
Similarly to your choices, I'm doing Fernando. I think that, Bryce, you're choosing what the audience will like to listen to. I am choosing what I would like to listen to, which is me doing Fernando, apparently.
I just want to quickly mention a little fun fact about the song Fernando. Ties into the Edmonton Oilers. So, of course, most Oilers fans remember Fernando Pisani. He was kind of the big hero of the 2006 Stanley Cup run. And when he first started playing for the Oilers, whenever he would score a goal, they would play the song Fernando.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, but here's the thing though. So I started working for the team a couple years into his career or whatever, and I remember asking somebody, I was like, "Hey, how come they don't play the song Fernando anymore whenever he scores a goal?" And it was like he didn't like that, so we stopped doing it. So
see, I can understand that. Like, if anyone has, I mean, Caroline, you have a name with a big song.
I was just gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, I have a name from like old songs, and so for a while, gentlemen of a certain age would sing me certain Katie kind of songs, and I think that gets old really fast.
Yeah, I described it as having a complicated relationship with Sweet Caroline. If it was played every time I scored a goal, I mean, there are just so many logic leaps I'm having to make to set up this scenario that I really don't know what. But I could see that, and like maybe it might not have been his taste as well.
yeah, and probably when he was growing up too, I imagine probably a lot of people were like singing Fernando or whatever. So I understand it. I always thought that was funny about him though.
Good. I do like theme songs though, like having like theme tracks that play. Anyway, second question, which other band or artist would you like to see do a hologram concert?
So I assumed that the sound was recorded and therefore the person didn't have to be alive.
Sure.
That's the path I took this down. Mm-hmm. And I landed on Janis Joplin, who is someone that I have always like really, her music has also just absolutely been a part of my life. And I absolutely love it. And I go to it and certain songs for different moods and different whatever. And I just think, like I said, I've seen a lot of artists of that vintage in concert, but of course that's one I will never get to see. And I would love to see her perform.
We're also owed really we're due for a biopic of her. I know for years there's like been lots of actresses like Renee Zellweger and a few others that have been kind of attached to star in this Janis Joplin biopic, and we've never gotten it. But Netflix or Hollywood, if you're listening, Hollywood's always listening. Get on this. We want to see our Janis Joplin movie. Come on,
Bryce.
So Katie kind of touched on this band a little while ago, and I know they still do tour with Adam Lambert. But I would love to see hologram Freddie Mercury performing with Queen. I think would be really cool. Nothing against Adam Lambert. I heard he does a fantastic job. But digital Freddie Mercury, I think, would be really fun to go see. Caroline, how about you?
Just before I give my answer, Bryce, I think that yours was a really good one because Queen, so much of their music sounds so different than every other song they do. Like you. So I think the experience of having a concert that really taps into that, plus just like amps the theatricality up of it, would be a really neat experience. Mine is Cher. And like you say, Katie, she was practically there already.
She's already there. Yep.
You know, she's even done it. She released her album of ABBA covers. She's in kind of the same sphere of it. And I think it would be fun. I think it would be a great show.
Honestly, a Cher's show is so over the top already that I don't even know that it would like. So I've seen Cher live, and I feel like her being a hologram, it would still be kind of the same show because it's so produced and it's so over the top. There was a point where she was flying over the crowd
in a cage.
You know, it's not like unplugged on a stool with a guitar and you're getting this intimate moment. Like it's not an intimate show, and I feel like it might be a good choice. And like I said, she's already pulling Sunny out as a hologram, so.
Halfway there already.
Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. I've had a blast talking about ABBA. I'm going to continue listening to these songs, at least until I get Lord of the Rings playing. Is there anything that you'd like to plug before we go?
Sure. I just want to remind everyone about our personal picks service. So if you love ABBA and you don't know what to listen to next, or you want a book in line with something you read recently, or you're in a particular mood and you don't know what to pick, you can access our personal pick service through the website. And the link will be, I'm sure, in the link list. It asks you a few questions about what you're looking for, and then our staff will compile a list for you of material in line with what you're looking for, whatever format you're looking for, and they'll send that to you, and you can then place holds and select which items seem like they fit the bill. And so it's a great way to find your new favorite thing.
Is it only for adults?
Absolutely not. We can do it for all ages. So help your toddler find his next favorite dinosaur book or whatever the case might be.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you automatically get all of our new episodes. Please also leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts. We love getting reviews. And if you like what you heard on the show, please tell a friend about us.
Mm-hmm. And don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. And if you want to share your favorite ABBA songs with us, or even, you know what, if you were at that September 13th, 1979 concert, we would honestly love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@epl.ca. Let us know, like, you were there and what you remember about the concert and maybe some of the songs that they performed. So reach out to us. Email us at podcast@epl.ca. or hit us up on Twitter by using the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.